Welcome to the Media Navigators podcast, brought to you by the World Media Group. My name is Belinda Barker and I'm the Chief Executive. Today, we're going to be talking about the human impact of business transformation. It's the 5th of November, and in the US, we're still waiting to hear the results of the US election. Here in the UK, we've just gone into the second lockdown. So we're in a period of dramatic transformation for individuals, businesses, and in politics. We're going to be talking today with Jenifer Berman, who's the CMO of Insider Inc. Welcome, Jenifer.
Welcome. Thank you, Belinda. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you're not too stressed today.
I'm quite stressed today, Belinda, but that's okay. We're happy to be here.
Good. Also going to be talking with Gordana Buccisano, who's the EVP for Global Client Transformation at Havas Media Group. Welcome, Gordana.
Thank you, Belinda, and hi, Jen.
Hi.
And I should say also the new chairman of the World Media Group as well. So congratulations and thank you very much for agreeing to stand up into that role. I'm going to kick off the conversation talking to Jen about some research that they've been conducting during the last 2 years, and I believe it is still ongoing, around the human impact of business transformation. My understanding is that when you started this project, you were really focusing on technology. And I'd be really interested to know how that's changed over time and why you have re-engineered that more towards the human aspects.
Sure, for sure. So yes, it is an ongoing research project, which we started about a year ago, actually. And as you say, we started it really focusing more on the sort of overarching idea of what business transformation means today. Lots and lots of conversation is discussed about transformative technologies and how they've affected our business and the rate of change we're all experiencing. But business transformation for us had become one of those overused terms, like, storytelling, to the point where it was almost meaningless. And we wanted to better understand how people were experiencing that. And we pulled together a group of about 60 thought leaders globally. And over the course of 8 roundtables in New York and San Francisco and London and in Davos, we asked a number of people how they viewed or what their definition was, what their definition of business transformation was. And we went into it thinking that it was going to be an Industry 4.0 conversation about technology and operations and systems. But what we heard again and again had nothing to do with technology. It was all about people. And it was about how people really are at the heart of business transformation, and increasingly how they are both the casualties of change, which there's certainly been lots reported on that front, but also increasingly how they're the catalysts of change. So how people are really driving change within organizations. And when we started, which was back in November, we certainly had no idea how prescient this would be. And we were about to launch the global panel in March. And then clearly we stopped and sort of observed and needed to take a pause. And we ultimately ended up fielding the global panel in May of last year. And then we were able to field the results over the summer. So we didn't, again, have any sense of how prescient it would be, but certainly what we've experienced in the dramatic transitions or transformations that we've experienced over the past 8 months have obviously focused this even more on how people are being affected by the worlds in which we're living in.
And were there any dramatic differences between the US and particularly the UK? Because I know you had those as two specific focuses.
It was less of a difference between the US and the UK and more of a difference. What we really observed were the differences across industries. And so in the conversation through the initial research that we did, and certainly the qualitative conversations, we ultimately landed on 4 sort of different buckets, and now how we view the idea of what human transformation meant. And the first was really looking at leadership and transparent leadership. The second was really looking at overall culture and how businesses sort of define culture and what that means for organizations. The third bucket was mental health, which clearly has been something that's been very top of mind over the past 6 to 8 months. And then the fourth was about sort of, as we would call it, sort of reskilling or side skilling. Again, lots of conversation about how people need to sort of change skills within the workplace to adapt. So those were really the 4 areas of investigation, but we didn't necessarily see so much of a difference between the US and UK, but we did see was a relatively marked difference across industries. And most of our panel was weighted between the tech and the finance industry. And that's where we saw, or quite a significant amount of the panel was focused between tech and finance. And that's where we saw some of the biggest gaps. And I think across the board, respondents in the tech industry were more likely to agree with the fact that culture, and certainly a company's culture, was a key factor in where they work and their decision making. Ultimately, employees within the tech industry felt that they should have a greater voice in shaping corporate policy. And this is an interesting point to kind of come back to, but the degree to which employees feel that they should have a voice at the table or a seat at the table in determining kind of corporate policy and how they are included in that. And a big conversation around sort of the frequency and transparency of communication. And I think that overall, all respondents across every industry felt that that was really the number one factor that impacts corporate culture. And again, this sense that employees should have a voice in shaping that. I think all employees across the board, or all respondents across the board, sort of are craving a sense of transparency from leadership. And that's certainly become even more acute sort of following the pandemic. And I think to a large degree, most agreed overall is that the rapid pace, and we can certainly talk about this, but the rapid pace of change, and it's certainly in the wake of the pandemic, I think 80% of all employees said that their roles were directly changed by the pandemic, which is not really hugely surprising. But I think one of the things that was most surprising is that over 50% of respondents across all sectors said that mental health is just not on their company's radar, which I think we certainly did this, the survey in May. I would wager to believe that if we actually re-surveyed, even now 8 months into the pandemic, that would probably be different.
That was May of this year. They were still saying that mental health was not.
That is correct.
That I have to say, I find that quite surprising and a little shocking. And that was the big businesses as much as the smaller businesses, or was there no real differentiation?
I think when we looked at, for instance, between tech and finance, 64% of respondents in the technology industry said that mental health is not even on my company's radar, which is a dramatic number. And that was 40% within financial services. So tending us that financial services moving a little bit more quickly in that regard. But that was sort of the overall number.
Gordana, does that surprise you, that those numbers?
It does, actually. Well, the parts of it doesn't surprise me. For example, your thinking and your findings around the importance of the talent and the people's voice in the transformational agenda. We see that actually in our client transformation plans. We have, although we have a technology platform and access to data and tools that are fundamental to creating these transformational solutions for the client, but in the end, we all net down. It is actually the talent transformation plans that sits at the core. And we always go back to that same old truth that unless you have the right talent to support each element of this transformational plan, we know that we will not succeed. And for example, in our industry, I'm talking about advertising, the war for talent is very real in our agency land. Therefore, we put a lot of emphasis on creating the right culture, Jen, that you were talking about, that creating the right cultural fit between the agency and the talent we employ, right? And that's why you see that more often that great leaders and great CEOs will always be directly involved in creating the right agency culture and programs to support it. It's just too important to delegate it to someone else. So talent and people at the heart of the transformational plans, absolutely not surprising, because it always goes back to that sort of having the right people to do the right job and right agency and industry culture to deliver that transformational plan. But I am surprised about the mental health not being on the top of the agenda, really.
I think one of the things that you just sort of, in terms of talent, Gordana, which is certainly true, and one of the things that we have observed, and this was not so much picked up in the survey, but in most of the qualitative conversations we had sort of following with other industry leaders, is about how change is being driven from the bottom up and from certainly horizontally from all parts of an organization. So the notion of top-down leadership is no longer, frankly, quite as, I don't know if I would say acceptable, but is no longer an absolute. And certainly we've seen in the wake of, here in the United States, in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, there has been an increasing push towards conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those are conversations that are really being driven across all parts of the organization and really forcing companies to reevaluate both their positions towards talent, but their positions sort of overall, and how they are looking at all parts of their organization and looking for sort of more diversity across the board. And so I think that that's been a big focus, certainly for us at Insider, but also for many of our partners and clients as well. And that is something that I think is not just happening from the top down, it's certainly coming from all parts of an organization and really forcing change. So I think this idea of community activism or employee activism is something that we're continuing to look at, and it's an interesting trend.
The speed of change, everything has telescoped this year. Businesses that had kind of 5 year strategy plans have had to achieve that whole 5 year plan in 6 months this year, or they've had to throw the plan completely out the window and start a completely different and new plan. And I saw an awful quote in your presentation, Jen. I can't remember. There was somebody, one of the CMOs that you'd interviewed, saying that whatever speed we're working at now is going to be the slowest that you ever work in the rest of your career, which frankly terrified the pants off me. In terms of kind of bringing them along with the business, helping them to change that rapidly, how are businesses doing this successfully? Gordana, have you got any examples or people that you've worked with on this successfly?
So the question is, if I understand it well, the speed of the change and what do we do to stay? What are the top tips to getting ahead? It's a big question, Belinda. Nobody should ask this question at this point in time, given what we are living through. But look, I think one of the positive side of COVID, if I may call it, is that we learned so much from these lockdowns and from working from home. And again, going back to our industry as a reference point, I think we are remarkable. The way not only how we manage to organize ourselves and run day-to-day client businesses, and it's almost seamlessly, but we also managed to run on the sort of day-to-day side, big and huge multi-market pitches, and it's all from your home desk and the single screen, which if you just think like 8 months ago would be something which would be completely unthinkable for us as an agency person. So if you ask me about the top tips, which is what I think I would kind of like to share, is that I think staying connected is a key thing, right, in this challenging time. So the organization that manages to connect the workforce, the managers that really truly stay close in this difficult time to its talent and people, and the clients are going to win. But it's really important that I think to allow for the downtime and allow for people to consolidate the learnings as well. So that's what we definitely learned from all this month working from home. We also talk about planning for the future, but be prepared for now, which is the big theme, right? So who can predict what is going to really happen in December? Never mind in 2021. So I think that the level of flexibility and adaptability is something that we all need to learn how to deal with. So having a long-term plan, but also being able to act on what's happening next month when we come out, for example, in the UK, out of the lockdown is something that all businesses will have to learn to deal with. And I think staying positive and promote positivity, especially with the young talent and young people, it's going to be really important, because for those that have just started in this industry and have not experienced big industry upheavals of the past that probably you and me have seen, we need to reassure them that we work in a remarkable and creative industry, and that we will recover and come back from this with heaps of learnings, and I think even stronger. And I think as a business, we really do need to encourage that positivity and make sure that we are looking ahead. And this is just a blip in the time that we will need to overcome. But cautiously, I think, because the times we were talking, if I just remember 6 months ago, we were talking about V-shaped recovery. We were talking about remarkable Q4s. And we are obviously not at that point. But I also have seen that when we came back in end of Q3, we have seen some uplifts. We have seen people coming back and client spends coming back, and also just the talent being much more reinvigorated and really wanted to lean in. So I'm positive, and I'm hoping that we all kind of overcome this moment in time positively.
I think the positivity piece of it, I would hugely agree with. I think one of the quotes that we had is, lots of people were saying that, in 6 weeks, the first 6 weeks after the initial lockdown, I know you're going into your second lockdown, right? We experienced 6 months or 6 years of change within 6 weeks. So the speed with which people were forced to adapt. But with that, while initially incredibly stressful, I think that there's been huge explosions in productivity and adaptation, right? I mean, different products and business units that you've evolved. I look at something, some of our business units that have changed dramatically just, in events business. The people who have been able to shift rapidly from a in-person, essentially like the version of a sort of a brick and mortar experience is into virtual events has been a huge opportunity to bring people together, the three of us together from, globally. The ability to bring people together at a moment's notice from around the world has also completely changed what that product is going to look like. I don't know for us whether to what degree we'll go back to looking at a traditional events business. And I think that change is exciting. I think potentially there will be certain businesses that are going to have to dramatically shift what they do, although it's looking at kind of the business you are in, not the products you have, which is what you have to really focus on. And so some of what Gordana mentions in terms of that adaptability, and the patience that you need, this is not, people probably will not be going back to the office, at least in the United States, until next summer. So by the time people actually step foot back in their offices, it could be a good 18 months from the time you actually left. And so what's changed in the midst of that, some of those transitions will be permanent, right? One of the respondents we spoke to specifically talked about the informality of communication and how empowering that was to her organization. She is a growth manager for a 40,000 person consumer package business. And she said the way that we needed to break down the formality of how we interacted with one another gave people so much energy and such a sense of power over what they could do in their decision making that it was hugely empowering and a positive move forward. I think some other things to kind of consider, though, is the longer tail on this, right? There is going to be the need to think from a labor market standpoint about how people are sort of changing their jobs and changing their skills. And sort of Karan Chopra was someone who participated and is part of our sort of transformation council, who's the head of an organization called Opportunity at Work. And he was really addressing the sort of huge mismatch that's happening in the labor market and this need to, at a more intrinsic level, get people to think about matching talents to tasks. So getting both employers to better understand sort of the job seekers and what are the transferable skills needed for certain types of operations, because what the pandemic is doing is sort of forcing different business units to expand and others to shrink. And so some of the discussion with him was skills needed, for instance, for an accountant would overlap with those needed to work in cybersecurity. And how do we create an education gap, both in our own companies, but also more broadly from the industry perspective, to help people be able to navigate those internal differences with more ease.
That's really interesting, Jen. You were talking at the beginning about that there were four kind of key buckets of findings from the original work. And as you continue the project, what are you adding to that in your next wave of work?
I think what we're really looking at is the effect on the bottom line. So lots of conversation and discussion about, for instance, how diverse teams lead to greater profits, right? There's been lots of research there that sort of discusses the connection between diversity and ultimately productivity. And I think one of the things that we are also trying to look at is what are the sort of direct kind of ROI implications of investing. The questions that we've had is, for some, is the difference between an enterprise business and a small business. And are small businesses as equipped to put the focus on people when they're just trying to survive, for instance? So are they focusing on technology because that's sort of core to their business and they have the ability to put the same level of emphasis? And so I think one of the things we'll be looking at is how does that break down between not necessarily just sectors, but also tiers of business between enterprise, mid-market, and small businesses. And then again, trying to really reinforce the argument about the opportunity costs involved.
I guess, Gordana, for you, your client base is, you only work with big global clients. So you're not working with any smaller clients. What for them are the biggest kind of issues around transformation? Do you recognize that the same things that Jen is talking about?
Look, I actually do work with the big and small clients as well. But I think that they're always, I think you go back to that, the initial tendency when we think about the transformation, whether it's on the client side or even on the agency side, is that tendency to focus on short term. Now, fix now, transform what we can do now, and then learn from what we are fixing now and projecting to future. And I think that's something that is here to stay, especially since we are dealing with now and COVID is impacting every day. And the businesses are actually looking at the opportunity. This is a great opportunity for the clients and businesses to really accelerate that transformation. And everybody is doing it, right? Small or bigger clients. This is happening across the board. I'm not sure that the end game here is a P&L, more profitable P&L. I think lots of our clients are actually looking at that sort of longer term, more meaningful connections with the consumer, building a brand equity. And that is becoming even more important because coming out from where we are today, the purposeful brands with the meanings, with the relevant and content and a relevant proposition to consumers beyond COVID are here to stay. And I think the efforts are not just to build a sales proposition, but it's definitely to build the brands and equations that are here to stay and really long-term propositions. And that will mean essentially in various transformational plan looking at the technology, looking understanding better their consumers, understanding also their where the growth is coming from, and how external partners such as us are there to help them to speed up the change, help with the transformation, get closer to consumer, make it more relevant and meaningful, and build the equity from there.
I think some of this, Belinda, is really, this conversation really sits against the backdrop of something that we internally at Insider call better capitalism, which is what Gordana is touching on, which is this kind of increasing push towards a redefinition of value within companies. So it's no longer just focusing on the notion of driving shareholder value, but if you're looking at really stakeholder value, it's about your employees clearly being one of your biggest stakeholders, and and extending from there. And so how are companies not only redefining their purpose from a marketing and positioning point of view, but how are they doing that really from an intrinsic sort of inside out perspective? And that is what, as Gordana says, it's what consumers are responding to, right? Consumers understand, and they certainly make their buying choices based on today, and increasingly younger consumers, as we know, make their buying choices based very, very significantly around purpose and around their connection and their emotional engagement with the with the companies that they choose to support. And so I think the going back to the notion of culture and going back to kind of this inside out idea of having employers or having a company really refocus their businesses at the heart and the people at the heart of that is a piece of that, and a piece of this sort of this larger conversation around stakeholder-led capitalism. So I would agree that purpose is at the center of it. And I think, one of the things, I think as we get to this idea of really, again, using the data to support the reason why, right? We all know that sort of, data is used to kind of help decide, guide our decisions. The more we know that there's a connection to a better business outcome, the more we are being, we know that this is an area to invest in. And I think one of the areas when you talk very specifically around how companies are readjusting, one of the things conversations that we were having is about, how to design transformation initiatives to really elevate these high value areas, right? And using the data to tell you, and then designing your transformation or organizational changes around those roles or those divisions that are really creating more value for you. You see that people certainly investing more in sustainably focused products on one level, but I think it also transfers to lots of different sort of ways that you think about from a business perspective.
And if I may add to that, Jan, it's not, when we are talking about the client transformation from the context of the agency perspective, as much as we are talking about transforming our client, we are transforming ourselves. So trying to find a way how we, for example, just give you an idea, at Havas, we talk about creating the meaningful media experience for our clients, right? And their consumers. But also fundamentally work very hard to create meaningful touch points for our people and our talents, especially in these difficult times. So, and it needs to go beyond the obvious. That's at least what we are trying to do. It's how do we as a business get involved in a meaningful way in the current everyday big issues. For example, I don't know, just without going too much detail, we launched the new social equity private marketplace as a way of offering advertisers easier route to support underrepresented group, right? And that came out as a big push out of Black Lives Matter. That was very meaningful for our talent and our people around the world. So we felt that's something that we wanted to invest, we wanted to be associated with. Or we talked earlier about the mental well-being, a big issue, big topic, very meaningful in this period. So we launched this thing, which is called Havas from Home, to support our talent and our people during the COVID time. So it's transformation, as you said, comes in all shapes and forms. Well, we transform the businesses externally and help our clients. We look to transform ourselves and make sure that we stay meaningful and relevant for our talent and our people. And these are the exciting things that we are doing. This is what I think is that positive effect of COVID that is happening to all of us, that we are now finding a bit more time and relevance to understand what really means, how affected we are with this, and how we're going to resolve or try to ease such a difficult period for our people, our team, and even our clients. And our clients respond really well to that because it is meaningful. It's what I need as a consumer, as an employee, and as a client lead.
That's interesting, Gordana. Unfortunately, we're already starting to run out of time, but I'd really like to touch on mental well-being. It is something that particularly in your research, you identified that smaller businesses were struggling with, Jen. Is that something you can talk a little bit more about and perhaps how it can be improved for 2021?
For sure. Yeah. As I said, I think half of those surveyed said that mental health was not even on their company's radar, which we found very, very surprising. And again, I think it would be different if we measured now. But the other piece that was sort of interesting was that there was a relatively significant gap, not only between sort of enterprise and small business, but how executives at different, or how employees at different company experience that. So there was more than a 15-point gap between how executives and entry-level employees recognize the accessibility of mental health resources, with certainly executives feeling that they were more aware of this. And that tells us that perhaps things aren't trickling down as much as they should. We spoke to a number of people, many kind of heads of, sort of HR, who were really talking about how they were trying to help with this direct connection. And there were some real takeaways that they gave us, which I think are interesting to sort of pass along, which was the big first piece is really about taking responsibility and sort of understanding, right, for all of us, life is complicated. I don't probably think there's a single one of us that can't say that mental health hasn't affected someone in your circle, your friend or family or professional circle in some way. So to that degree, it's really an employer's obligation to let their employees know that they are there to help and have an open conversation. And a big piece of that is really destigmatizing the issues around mental health and having open conversations. That's a lot about leaders expressing vulnerability and talking about their own experiences, having CEOs stand up on a regular basis to talk about their own struggles or those in their sort of, their immediate world. And that affects not only, again, how that employees feel about, but that also extends to customers and clients and ultimately to shareholders in terms of the level of, there's a word that I think people are using again and again. It was one that was really used at ANA, which I attended a few weeks ago. Empathy seems to be kind of like the new word that many are using. I think a few years ago, there was lots and lots of conversation about purpose. And I think we all have sort of gotten that memo of really understanding that there needs to be kind of a reason and a purpose to not only what we do and how we communicate internally and externally, but now being able to bring a level of empathy to our communication. I think if you would ask sort of what was like the one takeaway that you would have, I think it's how employees feel that degree of empathy from their business leaders. And that I think is a big motivator, both certainly in sort of driving positive corporate culture.
Jen, it's interesting in your report, you also, I think, touched upon mental well-being being important, but that smaller business struggles as they may not have a dedicated resources. And I'm not sure I actually think to a certain extent it's easier to address the challenges around mental health in a workplace, in a small organization than big corporations. And here's why. At the root of creating great mental well-being program, I think it's understanding what causes the stress and anxiety in the first place, and then deal with these issues first. Secondly, you need to spend time, as you said, empathy, get close to your talent, understand. So solutions that we put together are meaningful and they're relevant for each person that is actually at the focus of the mental health issues. So that is much easier to do in a small organization than bigger organization. And I think, thirdly, the answer is not always a big budgets and a big support teams to create this well-being program. More often than not, I feel it's actually the strong and well-organized mentoring and a coaching program that will go a long way to create supporting mechanism to recognize and address that mental well-being. And even just a smaller scheme, as I said, like understanding what are the current and burning issues, how do we connect in this time, how do we use technology to to connect us all if you are sitting alone at home and in front of your computer for 10 hours sometimes. What are the tools at our dispositions that we can, quick fixes sometimes, even just the meditation class or the yoga classes will go a long way to address some of those challenges that we are currently facing. So yes, so big or small, it's about empathy. It's about really closely understanding what is it that we are being challenged at the moment, what are the key mental issues, and finding ways to address them in a quick way.
Yeah, well, I think we can all empathise with the 10, 12, 14, 16 hours sat in front of a computer burnout situation, and Zoom burnout as well, that's for sure. I'm really sorry that we're going to have to cut it off here, because it always feels like just as you're starting to get into the heart of the conversation, you have to stop. But I'd really like to thank both of you for giving up some of your time today on what is definitely a transformative day, and hope to speak to both of you again soon. Thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you so much, Belinda. And it was great chatting with you, Gordana.
Thank you, Belinda. Great to see you, Jen.
Thank you.